Hello, peoples of the internet, I'm Mo, and I am here today with my January reading wrap-up. So I read 6 books and 2 poetry chapbooks in the month of January, and I'm just going to get right into them. As usual, I will be starting with the ones I liked the least and ending with the ones I liked the most. So the first thing that I have to talk to you guys about today is one of the chapbooks that I read, and that is Light Spectrums by Jessica Fuqua, I think is how you say her last name. And this is just a really short collection of poems that are about colors and nature and stuff like that. Nothing too heavy theme-wise. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really fun read. The reason I'm only giving it 3 stars, I think, is twofold. Partially, it's because I personally have a preference for long poems. I like to have story and narrative in my poems, and usually those are the longer ones, and the shorter ones are more like picturesque, which is definitely what this was. They were painting pictures of different, aspects of nature or whatnot. And they were fun, but they weren't something that I feel like is going to really stick with me for very long. The next one that I read, also a poetry chapbook, was Icarus and Other Poems by Pradeep Chaswal. I'm really sure I said his name wrong. And he is from India. So I found that to be interesting. You could see that in some of the poems that he'd written. And most of these poems are sort of talking about issues and things that are going on in the world, but also including themes out of mythology, hence Icarus. So Icarus is one of the poems in the collection. I actually did quite enjoy that one. There were a few others that I liked a lot as well. You do get to see some of the sort of Indian imagery in these also. So I think, once again, it's hard to rate collections. I really liked about half of the poems in this, and the other half were just kind of okay. So that's why I gave it 3 stars. But if it sounds like it's interesting, would be interesting to you, it's a chapbook, it's really short. I would definitely recommend picking it up and seeing what you think. The next thing I read, the first half of this is like all poetry, guys. January was a poetry month for me. So the next thing I have to talk about is Fungi from Yugoth. This is a collection of poems written by H.P. Lovecraft, and therefore they are horror poems, which is not something I've ever read before. I have read H.P. Lovecraft before, but only his prose and not his poetry, and I think I actually prefer his poetry. I really did enjoy reading this, particularly some of the poems towards the end, which were the longer ones, which comes back to me liking long poems. It was very much about this sense of wonder and, in certain sense, one's sense of dread as you kind of know what's going to happen or figure out what's going on. A lot of really weird stuff, basically. I mean, how many poetry collections have the word fungi in the title? If you like weird fiction and you like poetry, I think that you would probably enjoy this. The next item, and the last poetry item on this list is Songs for Ophelia. This is a poetry collection by Theodora Goss, and all of these have very sort of fairy tale or just sort of mythical types of themes in them. So there are poems about natural things like willow trees, for instance, but they are personified, or I'm pretty sure there was a poem about an ogre. Overall, it felt to me kind of like the poetry that people who live in fairyland would have written. If that sounds interesting to you, I definitely recommend it. Even if you don't read a lot of poetry, I think that this would be a collection that would be pretty easy to get into. Alright, moving on to other things that I read this month. Characters in Viewpoint by Orson Scott Card. So this is a nonfiction book, and it is about writing in general, but also more particularly about writing characters and making them fleshed out and realistic, and making them work in your story, and also the different viewpoints that authors can use and what their pros and cons are, I suppose. I did really like this. I felt like some of it was a little bit obvious, where he's talking about, characters need to have this and this and this, but at the same time, I feel like that if you had already written a story, it would be a good thing to come back to and go kind of use it almost like a checklist. Like, did I do that and that and that? I forgot to do this. Because you're thinking about so many things when you write. And there were sections of it that I thought were just really good. So overall, it's a book that I enjoyed reading, which I don't normally enjoy reading nonfiction, so that was nice. And yeah, I think it would be a helpful thing for people who write, particularly if you're starting out writing, to take a look at. The next book that I read is The Quest for the Fair Unknown. This is by Gerald Morris, and it is the 8th book in a series. This is from the Squire's Tales series, which is a middle grade series of retellings of Arthurian legends. And these retellings tend to focus more on the knights rather than on like Arthur and Merlin, who are definitely in the stories, but they are never main characters. And so most of the books are fairly like self-contained. There are characters who come back, and there are like little things that can get spoiled, but for the most part each of them is telling its own like story within the big legend. And so this one was his retelling of the Grail quest. As usual, it was hilarious and it was a lot of fun. I read it in one sitting, and I am definitely looking forward to finishing off the series. There are 2 books left that I have not read yet, so hopefully within the next few months I will be getting to those. The next book that I have is Tooth and Claw by Joe Walton. Many of you probably have heard of this before. It's made the rounds on BookTube. It's a fantasy of manners in which all of the characters are dragons. I think there's one character who appears for like half a scene who's not a dragon. Otherwise, all of them are, and it's really well done. It's a lot of fun. So if you enjoy like fantasy of manners or that type of Jane Austen-y, where it's all about the way that people interact with each other type of book, or if you enjoy dragons, or if you enjoy both, I would definitely recommend this as a really fun read. And the last thing that I have that I read in January was Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. This was a really interesting book. I actually read this as a buddy read with Victoria from A Hermit's Progress, whose channel I will link down below because she's awesome. And we both really liked this book. So essentially what it is it's Marco Polo and Kubla Khan are sitting in a garden together, and Marco Polo is telling stories about these different cities that he's been to Kubla Khan, and it's got a lot of different themes in it, and it's split up in these different sections. So you'll have a few of Marco Polo's stories, and then there will be a section about him and Kubla Khan talking to each other, and then you'll go into more of the stories. I found both of those different things very interesting. I particularly, the more I read along in the book, really started to like the characters of Marco Polo and Kubla Khan and their friendship with each other, which I thought was really cool. This book definitely delves into a lot of themes about communication and perceptions and how we view the world and how we interact with the world. Each of the stories about the cities was really quite short, like maybe 2 or 3 pages long, and it's just sort of this snapshot, but they were very whimsical and fantastical. And so while this is, I'd say that it's literary fiction with a touch of fantasy and some philosophy thrown in, essentially, I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars, and if that sounds at all interesting to you, I definitely think that you should pick it up. So, yep, that's everything that I read in the month of January. Oh, and I put up my goals video not too long ago. It might have been a while ago. But I, luckily this month, was able to complete 4 of my squares on my chart, and I think I need to get 3 a month if I'm going to finish it up by the end of the month, so I'm 1 ahead right now. We'll see how I do in February with filling this out. But yeah, let me know what you guys have been reading in the past month, if you've read any of these books, and what you thought of them. And I will be seeing you guys in my next video. Bye!